Welcome everyone to Beyond Kalidasia, the official internet television show of Legends of Kalidasia. I'm Jason, the creator of the game. And this new series of Beyond Kalidasia is going to be quite a bit different than the old series. This is going to be a behind-the-scenes look at my company, so I can show you how we operate around here. In fact, actually more of how I just operate, to be honest with you. We're going to take a look at some of the projects I'm working on, and also, most importantly, I want to share some lessons I've learned over the past few years of running this company, so in case you want to go down the path of creating your own game. So with that out of the way, let's get started. Now, one of the reasons I haven't made an episode of Beyond Kalidasia in over a year is because in the apartment I'm currently living in, I actually do not have a green screen set up, and that was kind of integral to how the show was formatted before. In fact, the piece of the green screen I'm building new are kind of right down over here as a bit of a trip hazard. I've been meaning to get around to finish it up, but it's been a few weeks. So also, though, the other thing I was going at here from changing the show format was, out there on the internet, there's plenty of people who already do game reviews, and there's plenty of people who do some battle reports of various qualities. Some really good, some not so much. But there are not a lot of game companies, at least I haven't found, who are producing their own videos about how their company works and how they approach different problems and how they solve them. And that's really what I want to do. I want to go behind the scenes, as I mentioned, of my company, look at some topic each episode here, and show you the problems I've encountered, how I've solved it, and kind of how I think the game industry is changing. So, what I'm going to start with here for this first episode is a topic I know very well, which of course is 3D printing, my workflow revolving around 3D printing, and kind of how that's affecting the miniature production industry. Now, I have talked plenty of times before, in fact I've read some articles about it, about 3D printing, how I think is affecting the game industry, and I've compared it to the current fight that's going on over copyrights with music and movies and BitTorrents and pirating and streaming, all that fun stuff. So I'll link to some articles down here in the show notes where you can find that information, so I won't go ahead and talk about all that again. I'm going to dive right into my workflow. So the piece of software I have here in front of me is Blender. It's a very popular, in fact I think it's probably the most popular open source 3D modeling and animation software. It's actually a fantastic thing, especially seeing that it's free for pretty much every use because it is licensed under one open source license. I do not know how this program stacks up to some of the more popular commercial ones like Maya or 3D Studio Max, but for all intents and purposes when it comes to 3D printing, especially 3D printing for mechanical things, tanks, spaceships, guns, that kind of stuff, Blender is fantastic at that. As for, say, if you're trying to do organic modeling, people, aliens, those types of miniatures, I don't know enough about Blender in that aspect to say if it would be good for that, but for what I do in terms of my spaceships for Kalidasia, it's fantastic and works great. Now, when it comes to Legends of Kalidasia, there are some rather serious gaps in my product line for my miniatures. In particular, some of these alternate variations of the warships, and like, say, example, the anti-aircraft frigate for the Argol Empire. In fact, what you're looking at here is a weapon sprue with a whole bunch of the anti-aircraft guns that would go on the anti-aircraft frigate. And the reason I'm actually doing this is, instead of producing traditional miniatures as an upgrade kit for these guns, I'm going to just sell the actual 3D prints. So if I zoom in here, you can see the individual polygons that make up one of the guns. Let me turn on the text, you'll see they have a little Gauss rifle or little Vulcan can looking things here, some sort of targeting system. These pieces were all built using very basic, simple objects, cylinders and rectangles, and kind of layered on top of each other to give the effect of little armor panels or little sensor arrays, and of course the main barrel of the gun here. And what you do is, after you got the model done, you export it as an STL format. STL format is one of the common forms of 3D models that a lot of 3D printing sites use. In this case, I'll go ahead and just dump it out as my Argol anti-aircraft battery. When it comes to actually printing the 3D printing out, everyone knows about MakerBot. MakerBot are the little at-home things that cost $1,000, $2,000 to do 3D printing at home. Those things are cool in a sense because they're cheap and they're easily accessible to everyone. but the detail level they get to is just too coarse for tabletop miniatures, especially in this case where I've got tiny little guns that go on top of little frigates. I actually use a company called Shapeways. Shapeways is one of the main companies that does 3D printing. They have very high-end, very high-quality 3D printings. You can upload the models to them, they'll print them out and then ship it to you for a fairly reasonable price. In fact, what you see here is the screen you would see after you uploaded that model I just saved. In fact, you can take a look. Here's all the tiny little guns lined up. Now, there's a whole bunch of different types of materials that Shapeways can produce. For me, when it comes to tabletop gaming miniatures, I prefer the white detail one. Now, they also have this thing as frosted detail and ultra frosted detail. Spec-wise, you can get a lot higher detail to them. Basically, the detail level is smaller, the minimum wall thickness is smaller. There's a lot of terminology you have to learn if you want to do 3D printing. The reason I don't like using them, I have tried them before, is I don't find that they're as easy to paint as the white detail. Even with primer applied to them, common paints, like for example Games Workshop's line of paints, just doesn't stick to the material very well. So that's why I found with white detail, it's got pretty good detail and pretty good resolution in terms of printing resolution. It's not quite up to the level of frosted detail, but a little bit of less quality is offset by the fact that it's much easier to paint. So what you can see here for the pricing, white detail is $4.37. So this sprue up here, which has a total of 24 guns on it, costs $4.37 for me to print plus shipping. It's going to cost me $1.09 plus shipping per set of 3 that I'm going to end up selling to the end consumer. Now, if I actually want to go down the route of traditional miniature production, what I'd do is I'd print this sprue off in a 3D print, I would send it off to my miniature production, they would make the rubber mold that would go in the spin caster for pewter, and then they'd make the pewter miniatures out of it. In terms of cost, an actual pewter miniature of this guy here, this 24 weapon sprue, would definitely be less than $4.37. However, there's going to be a fairly high initial cost to create the molds. Depending on who you're using to produce the miniatures, you're looking probably $100 to $200 to produce the mold. Now, at this time, for this particular upgrade kit, I'm going to be selling it directly to the consumer. I'm not going to be going to a distributor, and I'm not going to be going to a store. The advantage there, of course, is then I keep the full retail price. I get that as an income. So therefore, my initial cost can be a little bit higher in terms of the price per unit. Therefore, the price per unit that goes along with the 3D print is going to be higher than the price per unit for the pewter, but now I can kind of cut out the whole initial investment of the $100 to $200 for the pewter molds. That's a little bit more important to me at this time. Now, at some point in the future, of course, I would like to see my miniatures in the stores, and I would like to go that route to get bigger exposure and bigger availability for my miniatures. At that point, I'm going to have to reevaluate this position I just talked about, because obviously if I'm selling through a store, the price or the revenue per unit sold is going to be less than if I sell directly to the consumers. So I have to come back and check, is it still worth paying the extra money per unit to 3D prints versus the pewter miniatures? Is that still, I can make economic sense, or should I go down the traditional route of throwing a lot more money up front and then making a whole bunch of pewter miniatures cheaper than I can make any individual 3D print? Thank you for watching. I'm Jason, the creator of Legends of Kalidasia. If you have any questions for me, go ahead and send them to kalidasiagames@gmail.com. It's actually the account I use for this YouTube show. And those go right to my phone here, and I can answer those for you, probably on a new future episode of the show. So once again, thanks for watching, and have a good night.